Okay, guys, we're going to review this video of Mike and his Corolla. I'm going to go through it as fast as I can. We're going to watch one run, and then I'm going to break it down pretty much as hardcore as I would do for myself, and we'll see what we can get out of it. Okay, there we have it. So I think this was a 44 and some change second run, if I recall correctly. We're just going to dive right in. I'm going to try to do this in one take all the way through. There's quite a few places we're going to stop, so just try to keep up. Here we go. Okay, this is how far we're going to make it. So I'm pretty sure he turned in too shallow on this cone. I'd be surprised if he didn't hit it with the rear wheels. One thing that we have to remember is that in low speeds, our inside rear is typically tracking on the inside of the fronts. This is a mistake I made in the Z06. I just ran over that cone because it was such a slow section. Um, the faster you go, the more the rear wheels track outside of the fronts. So one way to tell if you're under driving is that you're always hitting stuff in the rear. You should almost always be hitting cones with the front of the car. Um, and then he also chooses to shift as he goes around this cone. And I'm sure that this is a really safe place for him to shift. He probably felt like this was the minimal risk of a misshift. I misshifted in this section on my first run. Um, but because of the lack of spool that he seems to have on this day, I'm pretty confident that staying in first gear would have made him considerably faster right here in the beginning. For one, the car would have rotated better with the engine braking of first gear, going around this cone, getting him downhill faster. And then he could have got up on the boost in first and then just shifted second quickly, kept the boost up going into this infield. Okay, so we're going to break down this section. When I walk a course, and I walk this course with a few people, what I'm looking for is transitional elements. I'm looking to try to make slaloms and transitional elements out of the entire course, because what that does is it forces me to try to find the highest cornering speed possible. Um, Typically, if I try to find ways to make things straight, then I end up with all these sharp, slow turns. And this is a case with cone walls and straight sections and even slaloms that you'll see in this video, is that they tend to mislead people. This cone wall in particular, I thought was going to have this problem because it looks like you should just drive to this wall and kind of curve around it in the same curve as this wall. And if you do that, you're going to end up kind of pointed out there at the grass with no good shot at making it into the infield with a lot of speed. So this cone here, and the first one way down here going to the infield were the only three I cared about in this section. And I tried to backside this one and then backside this one to make this section here as straight as possible. So essentially, this section's pretty slow anyway, right? So this chalk line was actually a really good reference, and most people didn't follow it. You needed to turn on the back of this first cone quite a bit, and then dive onto the back of this one to get second gear throttle down really high going into the infield. So you can hear how late it is to come on the power. And then he also is not using a lot of brakes throughout this whole video, so I don't know if he has a easy lockup problem on this car, or if he's just not used to using the braking power. But I definitely would have braked later, also going into this infield. So we'll watch this section now that I kind of gave you guys what to look for. Okay, so I think right here is the telltale sign. Okay, look at where he's at right here, right here. You can see how much steering angle he has in it. And we're not even past this last cone right here. Okay. And we're pointed way out here at the grass. We should be rotated the car and we should be more on this trajectory already right here so that we're already kind of getting on the throttle. I was full throttle, I think, before the this cone, and I was definitely full throttle through the next two. Okay. Okay, I like how early he was here, but he was early mainly because he wasn't braking deep enough. Um, I would actually like to see more angle kind of on the back side of this cone and more up against the back of the cone wall. That way he could turn on the back of this one more. Again, it's all just these transitional slaloms that we're kind of looking to make the course into. Okay, so he is actually pretty, I mean, he's in a pretty good position here. The problem is he ends up turning in a little too early and without enough aggression and ends up kind of deep. You hear he has to wait so long for the throttle that he ends up mashing it. Because he's so wound up, he goes into oversteer, and then we'll see what happens. Okay, so you can see big oversteer on the power, and I think it sounds like he just aborts completely. Now, I guess the advanced technique here would be to not abort completely, to try to trail off the throttle and actually use the oversteer going right and transition it into the left, which then will cut the line going into this braking zone. That's on my fastest runs with the Corvette. That was essentially how I got through this, is with just the slightest amount of oversteer at every cone to kind of cut the angle of attack on these cones. Um, Now, if the car isn't tuned properly for TPS, throttle position based boost, that might be hard for him to do in this car. So, but you can hear after the throttle chop, we lose all acceleration in this. And even though he's not carrying a ton of speed, he ends up shutting down really early. And again, there's not much braking force going on. So let's watch this next section. You'll see what I'm talking about. He sets up really well to get on the backside of this cone. You can see how he stayed pretty far off of this cone right here and kind of used all of this lane to get up on the back of this cone. Okay, so he did a really good job right here. Okay, now remember when I was in the beginning, I was talking about how slaloms sometimes throw people off, and same with straight sections, is they kind of bait your vision. Okay, and that's why you need to, when you're walking the course, you need to figure out which cones are actually important to you. And in this case, this cone right here that's dead center in the windshield, this one here, this cone doesn't mean anything to us. We've already cleared the obstacles. And what we should be doing is headed down to basically early apex right here and decreasing radius into this cone down here to be on the back of it so that we're as early as possible for that infield section. Now, what ends up happening is he backsides this cone and ends up way out here making this turn. It makes him really on the back of this one, which is what we want, but he does it by adding substantial distance. And I mean, I can tell you by looking at data that he probably loses 4/10 of a second right here just because of the added distance on the course. So you always got to focus on shortening distance as much as possible. So right here, he should be driving straight into this cone and decreasing radius onto this one. And you'll see what he does instead. You see how wide he drove out to the left. He followed that slalom cone, and it just kind of baited him out into no man's land right here. So there should be no left-hand steering angle at all right here going on. Okay, so again, we're really low in the boost. This is unfortunate. It is costing him a lot of time. However, he still lifts pretty early. Um, what I would do here is try to get up on the boost and pitch the car left around this cone right here and then slam on the brakes going into this U-turn. So you can hear it was just about to really get up on the power. Okay. Oh, hold on, I overshot it. Let's go back just a little. Okay, so here's another part where he lost a decent amount of time, or at least I assume a decent amount of time. You can see how much steering angle he's got right here versus where the cone is. He's turned in really early on this, which of course we try to preach that early is good. However, he's too shallow of an angle to this to be this early, and so he's going to end up kind of having to hold this steering angle to clear this cone. And anytime you hold the steering wheel in one position and our steady state throttle and then try to increase steering angle, this is almost always understeer. And if you drove the skid pads during the Saturday school, you probably learned this. This is why the throttle manipulation is so important. But basically, he gets into a steady state throttle here and tries to increase the steering angle, and it just ends up with a push. So he ends up kind of coming out of this cone wall without a lot of speed. Now he makes up some of his time back because he uses the fact that he's going a little slow to make his left-hand turn really early, and he has a great entry for the pit road. Look how early he's turning here. We already got left-hand steering angle, and we can still see the last cone in this cone wall. So this was really good. He kind of like made the best of a bad entry by making sure he was early on this exit. Okay, so back it up just a little. I like his steering here is good. He's got a constant arc going. Um, one of the problems is you can tell here he's pretty far off of this cone. Okay, so he ends up kind of driving at an angle into this straight section. Backsiding this off throttle was pretty important, and then rolling onto the throttle with the car with more power around this cone worked the best. Now again, um, I want to preach one more time the transitional elements. So when I come into this section, this is a slalom. It's this cone, the second cone there at the end, and then it's the first cone at the two cones before the end of the finish line. Okay, so those are the ones that he's working with. So he needed to really transition. In an arc. I was driving a car with like 600 horsepower, and I was still able to turn left going up onto the oval to optimize my line while being full throttle. Okay, so he needs to be trailing uphill right here on the backside of this cone up here on the left, and then downside the second cone in this box really aggressively to get any amount of throttle onto the finish. So right here, we want even more angle uphill on the backside of this cone and then turn down on the second cone of the slalom. You can hear how this really punishes him because he gets almost no throttle in before the finish. Okay. So the car's turning really well here. If he was slightly more uphill um, and rotating the car earlier, he could have probably got downhill and back to full throttle before the finish line really easily and even been up on the boost. One thing he does do really well here is he didn't go over the edge here. Going over the edge was a big problem. I originally thought there might be enough grip there to make up for the fact that it's going to unwedge your car. But I mean, getting over that lip just caused terminal understeer. So he does a good job staying on the oval, but he should have been a little earlier entering this box and turning earlier down the hill. You can hear just no throttle to the finish line. Okay. And so our goal going through this high two cone right here, this box, is to just the only thing we care about is that we clear this cone and get to full throttle. That's our whole goal. You can hear he's just not able to get there. Okay, guys, that's my talk through on this one. Hopefully it helped.